Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. My name is Cleo, and I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator at Interaccess. I'm thrilled to welcome everyone here today. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the land on which Interaccess operates has been the site of human activity for 15,000 years. The land we are working on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and it's now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. This acknowledgement is a small step in the larger necessary movement towards decolonization in light of centuries of violence against Indigenous communities. I would also like to address the ongoing violence against Black communities and to affirm that Black lives matter. It's essential that we as an organization and as individuals take concrete actions to dismantle systemic racism. As Interaccess undertakes this work as an organization, we also ask that the non-Black members of our community engage in anti-racist self-education work. We've compiled some educational resources, which you can find on our website at interaccess.org or at the link tree in our Instagram bio. So yeah, again, thank you so much for joining us today for the workshop A to Z Experimental Chatroom. This is the first of 5 workshops as part of Vector Festival. The website launched yesterday officially with the full programming. I invite everyone to check it out and follow along on social media with the hashtag Vector Festival. Tonight, we have a screening called Watching Together in Spite of a Dying Planet. And it's happening at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on our festival platform. And that will be followed by a live jazz performance by composer and saxophonist Justin Massey. I'll be adding the links to these events in the chat later, and you can always email me if you haven't received it. In terms of technical information for today's workshop, I'm repeating myself, but we will be recording this event. So if you don't feel comfortable being recorded, feel free to leave your camera off. But it's also really nice for us to see your faces, so it's up to you. But please do mute your microphone if you're not speaking to avoid background noise, and use the chat, which I'll monitor and can relay the information to Xin Xin. And you can also unmute yourself at any point to ask a question. It's a relaxed environment. So I'm here for the duration of the workshop if there are any technical issues. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Xin Xin, Xin for short, who will be running this 2-hour workshop today. Xin is a Taiwanese American artist and community organizer who works at the intersection of technology, labor, and identity. Xin co-founded Void Lab, an LA-based intersectional feminist collective dedicated to women, trans, and queer folks. They were the director for Processing Community Day in 2019, which is cool. We've done events for PCD, awesome. And they're on the board for the Processing Foundation. And finally, they teach at Parsons in the program of Interaction and Media Design. So thank you so much, Xin. It's such a pleasure to work with you, and you can take it from here.
Thank you so much, Cleo. I'm really excited to be here with everyone and seeing so many familiar and new names. So I would like to start by sharing my screen. Can everyone see this? Awesome. So the A to Z Experimental Chatroom is sort of an ongoing research and ongoing interest of mine. So to just say a little bit more about myself. My name is Xin. I go by gender pronouns they, them. I was born in 1986. I feel like that's important to talk about here in this context when we're talking about the older web, because I feel like I'm sandwiched in between generations where, I went through the dial-up, I went through the modem, and and I went through the whole Facebook and, Web 2.0 version of social media from the very start of it. So it's my perspective sort of comes from that and sort of come from my sort of like historical and teenagehood observation of all the different changes that has happened with chat rooms, but also with social media and the rise and falls of many of them. So I would like to turn it around to you, and I would like everybody to meet everybody in some capacity. I know that we have quite a group of people here, so sorry we can't do super in-depth intro, but let's try. So just give me a sec. Okay, I'm seeing people hopping up here already. Okay, so please try to join that link if you can. If you are unable to, or if you don't want to touch Google product ever, I totally understand. Feel free not to click on it as well. So there are basically 3 different ways I'm thinking of interacting with you guys today. First is through voice. Like please feel really free. I know like Zoom is a weird space socially, and it kind of feels weird sometimes to interrupt, but I just want you to know if you feel inclined to, please feel free to interrupt me at any time just by unmuting your mic. When you're not speaking, please mute your mic so that there's no audio feedback. And the second way I would like us to interact is by inviting you to directly type into my slideshow. So my definition of a workshop is not a lecture, and it's not a one-sided pedagogy. I have my own set of experience and you have yours. So I would like us to make it as generative as possible and sort of like explore all these different histories and nuggets of ideas together and see how far and how sort of exploratory we can get from there. So please feel free to comment on any part of the slideshow, like meaning if you see an image or see a reference and you're like, what's that? Or you have comments or questions about it, please feel free to click on it, and I'm gonna demonstrate it once, and I can do it again later. So you can click on something, say, I want to comment on the slide comments, which make no sense. And you can click on comment through this like little icon here, this little plus icon, and you can ask a question relating to that. So that can help me just keep track of questions. If you don't want to use this, this feature or this Google product, feel free to type your questions inside of the chat. It's hard for me to keep track of all these windows at the same time. So Cleo is going to help me to remind me if there's a question that come up on Zoom. Okay. So, and also, I don't have to be the only person who's answering questions. So if anyone else have answers or sort of want to extend any of the discussion through like chats or through like the slide comments, please feel free to do it. So, okay. Let's start with the first step. So if you can go to slide number 2, I would love for you all to write down your name and your gender pronouns. And the third thing I would like you to add is a playful ask, which is if you can include your pseudonym or a pseudonym that you would like to have. So maybe one way to do this is clicking on shape, and you can like create a new shape. And I'm gonna start with mine. So let's do this for like a minute. I'm gonna mute myself so you don't hear me typing. Okay, I just added additional pages.
Hi, Xin. This is Brandy. What happened? Actually, I typed something out and I don't see it anymore.
Wait, where are you? Where did you type it?
It was like a scroll, and I put Brandy and like pseudonym and she, her, and I think it was on the original page, and it's no longer there. Maybe it's just me and my tech skills.
No, the same thing happened to me with the star. My name and like pronouns were there, but they are now gone.
I'm not sure. Can you try adding it again?
Sure.
And feel free to add new pages if we ever need it. Okay, so for those of you who are done, let's just take a moment and read through everyone's introduction. I'm going to move some of the ones that's sort of offset into the center. Amazing. So I agree with Vicky Wu. I love what is going on here. I love just like the amazing variety of shape that's coming up. Like immediately, it just shows, I don't know, it's just like such amazing, wonderful, explosive energy here. Okay, so please take a moment to read everyone's names as a kind of wrapper for a proper introduction. And I just wonder if anybody here would like to contribute a sort of like experience of like what interested you about this particular workshop. Maybe you can also share like what kind of experience, whether it's positive or negative or complex, that you have with social media and chat room in general. So anyone want to speak up, feel free to unmute your mic and share your experience, or also feel free to type your experience into the chat.
Hi, my name is Kay, and I wanted to share why I love chat rooms. I kind of grew up with it. Like my dad, when we immigrated to Canada, he went back to China, and then I had the longest long distance relationship with my dad. So like intimacy in chat room was something that I grew up with, just like loved ones being accessible through chat and MSN. And I had the longest period of chatting with crushes and like making new friends on MSN and then Skype and then Messenger. So chat room is a very intimate space for me, and I care about it a lot. Yeah, that's what I have to share. Thank you.
I love the word intimacy that's being brought up here. And I love, was it mostly MSN Messenger?
For the longest time, yes. Like growing up, I think MSN was what I talked to my dad with, and then in middle school, and then suddenly it just got like hacked and like everyone just like migrated. It was kind of sad.
Does anyone else want to add on to what Kay said or have a different experience?
Yeah, similar to Kay. Hi everyone, Shalaka or at Extra Virgo Olive Oil is my alias. Yeah, just adding on to that, I also had the same relationship. My mom and I migrated here, and then my dad was away in the Middle East. And so yeah, it was for a long time there was like this placelessness that existed on how we interacted. But it's taken me a really long time to realize that chat rooms and the online space is a very real place, and there's lots of invisible code of conduct that I think is really interesting to navigate as the world sort of changes and as chat rooms change. I definitely have a strong nostalgia for MSN and Yahoo Messenger if anyone was on there. And like all the games that you would play. Like I've never played chess in real life, but I definitely know how to play on Yahoo Messenger. But I feel like chat rooms as they've evolved now are something that I'm not interested in like as much. Like they give me less of the happy vibes and more anxiety. So yeah, really keen on how things have changed and how what do these evolutions mean in terms of like temporality and space and all these weird and wonderful things. Yeah, really excited for today.
It's really, oh, thank you so much for sharing, by the way. It's really interesting for me to hear like sort of like two experiences, one after another, that seems to relate to the experience of immigrant experience and also the experience of like being in long distance, relationship, in a family context or whatnot with someone else in, maybe somewhere around the world, and how that fulfills certain kinds of emotional needs and intimacy. Does anyone have an experience that's very different from the ones that's being mentioned?
I can say, everybody, I'm Matt, he, him.
Hi, Matt.
I'm really interested in this just because I kind of came into my kind of adolescent socializing years just as the internet was kind of picking up in the late 90s, and I've put a lot of thought into how that formalized and shaped kind of my socializing, my behavior when I socialize with people, and conforms, some of your behavior and your attitudes towards what it is to be a social being, and just being on that cusp of this new thing, realizing that there was a before and there's an after, and yeah. And interested in seeing that, how this formal communication style does influence, how the format of a desktop is is the default of how we're interacting with this machine, and how that's become standard and given, all very interesting to me. So I'm excited for this.
Amazing. I'm really glad that that was brought up. It reminds me of a really good reading. Sorry to be throwing readings right now, but I just have to mention it. It's a reading it's a very short one by Everest Pipkin, called "The Desktop Is Not My Beautiful Home," and it talks about, it's not about chat rooms specifically, but it's about how like the aesthetic and the imaginations of interface in a desktop context has evolved and became, like sort of like brought into a greater public consciousness over time. I think a lot of what we will be talking about and exploring today is on interface and on sort of, how design form thinking, sometimes in really problematic ways, how these sorts of like intentions behind like companies that run chat rooms, or designers who think that they can use a top-down approach to affect social relationship. How do we like think beyond that and become very skeptical of that, or become more critical of it? So I'm going to move on to the next slide. Thank you for those who shared. So a lot of the stuff that I'm sort of mentioning, I can't go into it with great depth because of the length of the workshop, but I'm going to dip my toes into all these little things. If you ever feel like you want to add on top of any of the ideas being brought up, feel free to add a comment, or just like talk about it in the Zoom. So there are generally 3 different kinds of networks that the web, but also like the chat rooms, or social communication software can sit on top of. So the ones that we're the most familiar with are the centralized network. So the idea is that there is a central server, which is represented by that middle node, that connects to all the different computers, all the different so-called clients in a network context. So for instance, one of the most obvious one is maybe Facebook. So Facebook has its server, sitting somewhere in the dark in the code, and essentially housing all of our information and all of our profiles, and the residual data that come along with that, somewhere else, right? That's sort of beyond our control. There's also the decentralized network and the distributed networks. Those are sort of buzzwords that kind of get brought back over and over and over again, but I want to emphasize that these are ideas that had existed since the beginning of the internet. Like these ways of thinking about network and these ways of thinking about how information are distributed has always been there. So it's in terms of like thinking about how we can start like prefiguring the future or imagining like different kinds of social space, sometimes it's also useful to like look back and see, oh, why didn't X took off, or why did it not work, right? So so here's my sort of brief like understanding and keywords that I think relates to the overall experience of like socializing on Web 1.0. Like, please feel free to jump onto slide 7 now and add your own words if you like. But like the kind of like what the part of it that I actually miss the most personally is like the serendipity part of it. So essentially, back in the days, in the 90s, when you go onto chat rooms, you can't really expect other people being there. You can't really expect your friends being there. You can't really expect people you know or have chatted with ever being there. You have to run into them. So it's not, it's the opposite sort of experience of what we have with a phone, right? Where like messaging and connectivity always follows you and is portable and almost becomes an extension of the body. Back in the days, a lot of computers were owned by families. You know, you had family computers that you share with other people. And you also, you know, there isn't a lot of sort of like framework and robust thinking relating to authentication. Like, how do I prove that someone is someone? and so there was a lot of serendipity because of that. It's extremely easy to make new accounts like on a lot of these chat room or framework. So essentially, you know, you can log into a chat room and just like be a new person every single time you go in there. Like there's nothing that's really stopping you from doing that. So it has like this kind of polarizing effect. On one hand, it made the space less safe, right? Like people were less accountable for their actions, because if you go online, if you like flame someone, which, you know, in the internet term means like insulting someone, if you flame someone or if you like troll someone, you can just log out, log back in with a different name, you know, and essentially troll behaviors. But at the same time, like the kind of like upside and beautiful side of it was the kind of like natural, organic, like result of like people having more fictional online presence. A lot of the stories, a lot of the way people presented themselves were a lot more fictional, and we'll dive into that a little more through examples. And also, I think another characteristic that felt really clear was like the idling aspect of it. Like, it's kind of, I feel like people maybe can relate or be reminded of that now more, now that we're in quarantine mode. Like, there was so much of the Web 1.0 that was just about waiting. Like, there was so much like idling. And like, if you ever use a like AIM, like AOL Instant Messenger, like it's like a really tricky boundary to like set yourself to be away and set an away message. Because there's actually a countdown on the screen on like how long you've been away. So if you know, if I'm like 16, if I tell my friends, hey, I'm going on a date tonight, and the date is over in 2 hours, like it's like there's like something really awkward about returning to that screen because people will know you're back, right? So there's like a lot of intricacies relating to idling that's not simply about like being, you know, living a slower life, or like not being able to connect to people, but it's also about like something a lot more complex that kind of affected social relationships. Okay, so I'm just gonna read a couple more keywords that people are putting in. So there's one that I think is really interesting, going beyond the body. Whoever wrote that, if you feel like talking about it more, please feel free, but no pressure at all. I felt like there was a lot of, for me, a lot of artificiality related to the Web 1.0 because the internet were slow, right? And like because connectivity were a lot weaker. So essentially you start from like purely text chat, and there's like a lot of different ways to like try to embody, like try to insert your body and make your body feel more present through text.
I got my microphone to work.
Oh, yay!
Yeah. Well, I just, going beyond the body, I wrote it next to artificiality because I think there can be like, oftentimes the way that people will talk about social media or like internet identities, you know, it's kind of like predatory, fake, like, and there's like a negative connotations to like virtuality. But I think especially for many queer people or people who don't necessarily, or people of color or people with who like your body can be like a barrier to you interacting with others. It's like the artificiality is somehow like more real than reality, you know, and it's reality that goes beyond like the embodied experience of being a person.
Yes, I absolutely love that. And that's also like there's so much to say about the relationship between anonymity and queerness, like at that time. I mean, even now, right? But like the idea of being a queer kid in, you know, a conservative town and not essentially needing to be closeted and exploring yourself, like having anonymity and having artificiality as a layer of protection, as a layer of like safety, felt really, really important at that time. Also, like looking at getting lost and wandering, I love that. I felt like, yeah, there was so much of getting lost, like in the 90s, like even in the sense of like when you had to go to a DVD store to find movies, right? Like I watched so many movies that Netflix wouldn't have recommended to me. You know, I read so many books that just like random books. Like like those books didn't help me build my career or anything, but it's, you know, but because of that, there was like a very romantic atmosphere attached to it, because essentially you have to like give everything a try. And I thought that was like a very distinctive quality of the timing Web 1.0.
I was thinking a lot about like GeoCities pages and how people were creating not only, you know, very visual based spaces to be explored and to get lost in and to move through, and like, you know, you could go and do like a spider web of these different home pages and virtual towns and totally just, you know, completely not be able to find your way back to the start.
Totally. Yeah, GeoCity is a really good one that I didn't reference in this presentation, but it's like a super important one. Someone said, let's see, I have so many windows here. Someone said, Leon said, I recently got lost in TikTok and YouTube content bubbles, videos with 0 to 200 views. Super interesting stuff, especially on TikTok where creators are so interconnected.
Yeah, TikTok, I find TikTok fascinating, especially when we're talking about content that's being created like in a decentralized way, because it kind of disregards any or many concerns of like authorship, and it's all about remixing each other's content. And so I started looking at like on videos, people who comment, like what are the videos that the people who comment make? And oftentimes they're like these bubbles of a few accounts that are like reference each other because they're friends. But then they're trying to emulate what they're seeing the others do. And then that somehow is like even more telling of like the cultural, as like a cultural phenomenon than the things that actually go viral. It's like these people emulating other things, and it's like super weird. I would really encourage people getting TikTok and looking at like creators that have like very little traction. There's like really particular stuff.
If you have any recommended accounts or anything that you want to share, feel free.
Honestly, it's more like the algorithm I find is very interesting, and it's extremely personal. So it's like anything, you know, they're like high schoolers, they're like grandpas, they're like all sorts of people. And so as you engage with the content, you can just navigate through it. It's like super based on curiosity. I think the algorithm is like very, very interesting.
I just wanted to jump in on the algorithm part because I think it's interesting how you basically train the algorithm to navigate the app so that it directs you to different content. So yeah, like, there's like the idea of straight TikTok versus alt TikTok, and yeah, people like, it's like two different camps almost. It reminds me of Tumblr when people started like separating them. So I just think that the algorithm is interesting to see as not only a way to navigate content, but also something that people are aware of. But I think it needs more critique.
Wonderful. I think what's really interesting for me about chat rooms and why I kind of like name or title the workshop with the word chat room instead of social media or anything else is because I think there's a kind of openness to chat rooms. There's a kind of brokenness to it, and there's a kind of like openness, and it's really interesting to see. There's like a lot of people who try to define like, social media must be X, or a blog can't be a chat at the same time, or these kind of like clear definition of what a blog is versus what a chat room is, but which I think is useful sometimes, but also kind of like stop like the imagination of a hybridity and like imagination of how like things, how communication can work within like Tumblr or within like a blog space. Tumblr is like a really great example of like that hybrid of like publishing versus like social media, in the sense of like there's like participatory interaction that happens from different people. Yeah, me too. Okay, so I'm going to move on. So CompuServe is one of the earliest sort of commercially available, widely used software that had a chatting feature inside of it. It was still not super widely used. It was used by a good amount of people. What really sort of like brought the idea of chat room into public consciousness, and like the essentially the very first chat room that's ever being made as recorded by the US history is this software called the Tachomatic. So Tachomatic was a product of like this system called Plato, and it's essentially originally really only used by people in tech and people in like an institutional university context. They were essentially like people who all worked in the same buildings, getting online and talking to each other and communicating with each other through Tachomatic. So I want to, and this is 1974, right? So it's quite a while ago. But they didn't really, like, what's interesting about Plato and Tachomatic, yeah. Okay, and what's really trippy about that is like I looked at some commercials and posters for CompuServe, and like the advertising essentially was talking about the lives that we're living right now. Like it was like promoting like, you get to talk to people from 17 different states, or like cook together without ever really having to cook for other people. and so it's, yeah, it was really trippy and weird to see how actually similar, how we haven't moved super far in some sense. Okay, so what I wanted to try here is there is a Tachomatic simulator that we can use. So I would love for you to go on Tachomatic and check it out. So I'm going to open a new tab here. And I want us to kind of like approach this almost through like the lens of like thinking about interface and how these interface possibly shape relationship and shape possibilities of that relationships. So I'm going to open, oh, and by the way, each of these chat room only allow 5 people. So there was also like very specific design that, you know, they had either due to like network constraint or something else. So I see Kay just created sexy time. So someone can enter that room or create your own room. So I'm going to, so I just created a room. And what's unique or maybe just different about Tachomatic? Oh my goodness. Yeah, and there's sound, I'm gonna mute it. What's unique about it is that when you're typing your message, it is live. Like other people can see your message live. So each of us have almost like a pad. Everybody have like a notepad on the chat, in the chat room. So this is quite different from what we're used to, right? Because I can like keep making new line, and it's gonna auto scroll.
What I really like about this is like that you can't really screenshot the conversations. Like it doesn't make any sense if you come back to it later and you look at it, because it's just like a huge pile of text, which to me, I'm like, there's sometimes where I have conversations, especially things that are about sensitive topics, where I'm like, I don't really want people to necessarily like be able to go back to this conversation later and look at it, but it's not always useful or like practical to use like encrypted channels. So this is like the opposite of encrypted, but it like jumbles the path in like a totally different way.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. That's a great point. And one thing I was thinking about before is that so much of our online communication is like casual and informal in nature, yet it's documented in a way that past communication wasn't. So like that in itself feels really formal, and it makes things feel like there's sometimes more weight to them, even if it's something really simple.
Yeah, I love the word, like, yeah, I feel like formality is like, so it's become such an embodied experience in like the current web. It's really, well, I think different generation approach it slightly differently. But that's really interesting. Yeah, but I think so I was like trying to read up about the different kinds of experience that people had with Tachomatic specifically. Obviously, I can never live in that time and really like understand what it was really like. But essentially, because you can see someone live typing, the experience was a lot more immediate, and the conversation was a lot more immediate. I mean, sort of like what John is talking about, you know, conversation become more casual and more generative. And what's really interesting for me is like thinking about how this changes the output of a collaboration or a conversation, right? How does it changes the output of writing? How does it changes like, you know, not output in a kind of like instrumentalized way, but like a feeling or relationship between the people who's using it. So I'm just seeing some comments right now. This workshop's so reminiscent in chat room in its own way, like I'm following the Zoom convo and presentation notes. But the kids almost only uses Snapchat. Yeah. Okay, so the sentimentality and the intimacy around text. Oh my God. Like I feel like I went into a deep hole with looking at early chat room, and there's just like so many creative ways that people have to use text in order to like show their body or bring their body into it in some way, right? So if anyone knows about Mud, it's essentially a multiplayer like text adventure game. There's like a lot of like invention around that. That's interesting. So that's Tachomatic. I think I'm going to try to like show a couple examples, and later on when you're working among yourself to come up with some like ideas, quick ideas for a chat room you would like to see, you can consider some of these tools as your collaboration tool. Okay, and after that, so essentially in like 6 years. So a lot of these things happen like in a 10-year zone, right? They all look old. They all look like they happened a long time ago, but there's a decade in between a lot of them. So BBS happened next, and that was a huge explosion of just essentially the earliest form of online forums, and the BBS at the time operated on centralized networks. So essentially you're a node computer, you log in to connect to a BBS that's hosted on someone's server. Simultaneously, in 2 years, there was something called the Usenet. And these two were like really kind of like interesting side-by-side comparison, because Usenet was not centralized. It was hosted in a decentralized way. It was hosted by multiple servers, by multiple groups. The discussion board that sort of evolved on Usenet was called the news group. And what you can write like messages was called the news feed. So there was like a kind of like sort of like seriousness, right? Like by calling a message a news, like the messages essentially became a little bit more like emails, like written in paragraph form instead of like very short forms. And what's interesting with Usenet was that the idea of a FAQ and the idea of flaming and the idea of a sock puppet, which essentially means like someone pretending to be another person, and the idea of spam was essentially created through like the users of Usenet. So there's always this kind of like check and balances and sort of like bouncing back and forth between like a decentralized network and like the need to moderate it. And I feel like that's kind of a really key sort of like crucial like moments and things to think about when we're like thinking about how Web 1.0 eased into Web 2.0 and how certain arguments were made possible because of like certain kinds of like insults and trolling that people experienced. So after that, so you can see like this, essentially like the history, the very brief history of experimental chat room was a history that started from text and eased into image and eased into sound. So what happened next? Actually, Mud is something that happened like long before like many of these software that I already talked about, but like in 1980s, it was really when it sort of like became solidified and like popularized. So the idea is it's a multiplayer role-playing game. So you can, log into, there's like many different kinds of Mud games that you can interact with, and you can log into it and say, hey, I want to be this character, I want to have this kind of weapon, and I want to interact with the world with this way. And you would essentially crawl in the dungeon, but not only like role playing, but also chatting with other people about things that's unrelated to the game. So it was like, it had a frame of like fiction. It had like a fictional frame, but also it wasn't restricted by that. So you could people still like kind of really talked about things that's outside of the Mud context. And what I feel like one of like the really pivotal moment is this software called the Quantum Link. which became AOL later. So if you like look up like advertisement video on Quantum Link, it was almost like the beginning of commercializing play and commercializing funness. So like if you compare the interface, like whatever happened before, we're sort of like, like like aesthetically very plain. It's always text on a kind of like black background or white background. It has this kind of like hacker aesthetic and doesn't necessarily feel very welcoming to a lot of people, especially if they were not, like comfortable using technology or exploring new technology. So Quantum Link was an effort to not only make it more accessible, but the underpinning idea is really to make it more commercially available. So it was all about bright colors. it was in the 80s, it was all about like creating, like thinking about social media as a kind of world, and you're building worlds, and what, like if you can build any world, what kind of world would it be, and this kind of like really optimistic cyber utopian ideas of the web. And I'll return to Quantum Link specifically later on, because I feel like that's sort of pivotal moment. Prodigy was another blip along the way, also another chat room interface, and we easing to AOL. Which I'm gonna talk about too a little more later. Another software, so you can see like it sort of became like more colorful and more image based as time goes on. Has anyone here heard of the chat room called the Palace? So the Palace was like a complete revolution of its time. It was the first chat room where you could bring your own images into the game. So if you look at the chat, each one of these chats where like, consists of like your own avatar. So there's like an avatar image. You can, you would just like, you can drag yourself around and play, just like sit in different spots on top of the background. And you can like type and chat with each other. And you can also do something really interesting and like kind of a epiphany for avatarness, where you can like change outfits. You can have like different hairstyle, different heads, different bodies, and different outfits. And you can like essentially like modify your look by placing all these like tiny little images on top of each other, exactly like that. And I'm not gonna like have us play this right now because it's a little time consuming, but there is a Palace simulator that you can use. You have to install Flash. You have to install the Flash Player 11 in order to use it. And you probably have to use Safari, but it's yes, you can use it. I just tried it, and there's still a lot of people on it, which was really interesting. There's a lot of chat room that happened in between. I'm gonna fast forward to one that I also think embodied, sort of like the culture and spirit of this time, called Chat Roulette. Has anyone here used Chat Roulette? Sort of. I don't feel like I know anyone who uses seriously. It's like mostly kind of just like a drunk joke or something. Oh yeah, so not totally appropriate for like public recorded presentation, because you never know what's going to happen with Chat Roulette. So for people who are not familiar, the idea is you go to this website. It's still live. You can still, like try it with your own risk. It's you log in and you are like randomly paired with anyone in the world that's using Chat Roulette at the same time. and like the video of both of you would pop up in this like very abrupt way. So over time, it sort of like attracted like the fetish community, but also like all kinds of like different kinds of community that like found it interesting. And so there's a lot of like surprises and things that's potentially inappropriate on chat roulette that can happen, and but also like kind of a really good way to kind of like snap view of like what that time was like, I think. Because I think simultaneously there's a lot of serendipity, but then there's also, a lot of racism, there's a lot of sexism, there's a lot of sort of all the dark forces and things that our society is still living with that just kind of unleashed, right? It's kind of like someone describe it as like the bathroom graffiti. It's kind of like the bathroom graffiti. And so I want to return to the quantum link a little bit, because it was like such a big shift to go from like a text-based interface to this, right? Like essentially this like almost like in retrospect, I mean, I can imagine it looking really cool at the time, but it's like really cutesy, goofy little like, graphical drawings. The quantum link, you can think of it as like a kind of like corporate, you can think of it as a mall. A quantum link is like a mall, like, and it has like all these different center inside the mall that you can visit. So there's like the learning center, there's like the center you go to play games, like arcade, and there's also like the customer service, there's where you go to read news, and there's also something specifically relating to this workshop called the people connection. So people connection is essentially where you go to find people and chat with them. And so much of that, like our literacy and kind of like experience with how you can use text to make faces and make like emoticons or to like embody a gesture came from the limitation of design of not being able to use much else, right? At the time we were just really working with the text. So how can you like really push the boundary of that was sort of what created a very beautiful culture, in my opinion. So like moving forward, like around the same year, Quantum Link released a multiplayer online world. So prior to this, you only had MUD, right? It was like a multiplayer text world where you just like interact with each other and like play out the scenarios through text. But with Habitat, which is released by George Lucasfilm, it was a graphical interface where you can join and meet other users, say hi to them, and interact with each other. So some of the key features of Habitat. First, I think this is something that people really cared about at the time, being able to change your avatars. So being able to customize and modify your avatars, being able to there's like all these like obsession with changing heads, and there's like all these, every head had like different prices. You have to go to different oracles to buy them. So like, the underpinning of the Habitat was very commercial. It was like almost like a great social experiment on like how much can we get people to buy these like pixel graphics, right? and how much can we like get them into a situation where they take pride into holding certain kind of like social position inside this world. So looking a little deeper into the interface and interaction side of things, what was really interesting at the time with Habitat was that people at the time really believed that in a new design of a technology, and I'm like paraphrasing them, so I don't think what they say totally makes sense. So I just letting you know, it's like I'm paraphrasing them, and I don't think it totally makes sense. What they're saying is that they believe at the time that interaction, the designing of interaction, is way more important than technology or information. So it was way more valuable, and it was what was going to drive the cyber world. So the idea with Habitat, you can play with a joystick or a mouse, and each direction of these joystick did a different thing. And people at the time were also like super obsessed with like, you know, utilizing every single key on the keyboard. So like F1 to F7 each did one thing, and Control 1 to Control 0 all did different kind of gestures. So this kind of like mapping between like the keyboards and behavior and interactions was kind of like the characteristic of what Chatroom was like at the time. So a lot of menus, big menus, and also yeah, what like so there's kind of like some like this discrepancy and like hypocrisy that I'm really interested in looking at in the context of Habitat, where they like at the same time like promise a kind of imaginary world, but then like when you really look at what was possible inside of Habitat, it was like really mundane things. Like, okay, we're gonna make a totally fantasy imaginary world, but we're gonna go in there to like watch sports, play games, party, do business, have sex, and like religion. Like it's just like, you know, it was like a little disappointing when I saw the different options. Like it like a lot of Habitat felt like hanging out at a mall. You know, there's like a sense of enclosedness. There's a sense of like, you know, you can go to ATM to get money, you know, and it's like, yeah, it's kind of cute, but it's not that interesting at the end of the day. And it was really revealing to like discover this document that documented one of the seminar that happened with the Habitat like tech seminar, where the creator essentially talked about how the Habitat beta test was actually really about like testing the boundary and testing the kind of like, you know, how far can people go to pay for this game. So, you know, every minute it costed $0.08 to play, which is kind of a lot at the time, you know, back in that day. And like people essentially would spend like $300, $400 like every month to play this game. Right, like just like this, like, I mean, it's like funny because it's, you know, at the time it's like high tech, right? It's like this is something that people will pay enormous amount of money for. And also like the beginning of like how like different kinds of aesthetic and like how like resolutions and aesthetics were like attached, were like given a price tag, and how that also like relate to people's like very complex online identity. So the next kind of group exercise I want all of us to do is I would like us to take a brief skim at the Habitat technology seminar document and like write down a couple of different top-down decisions that were made that shaped the Habitat community, because it's really interesting. And make sure you start from page 162. There's a lot of different pages in here. Okay, so this is where you want to start. The Habitat anecdotes and other boastings. This was like almost like a tech conference, a presentation that Habitat were giving to, you know, their potential partners and people. So, so if you take a look at some of these anecdotes under here, there's some really interesting stuff on here. So let's take 3 to 5 minutes to read through some of this. You know, don't need to do a deep read, just like skim through it and see and pick out some of the interesting observation on how some of the top-down decisions were made that shape the habitat community. Okay, I'm going to start reading some of this. And feel free to keep writing and finish your thought. But actually, before I read any of it, does anyone want to jump out and talk about what you've written?
Can you hear me? I just wanted to say, usually at this time in a thing, I'll do a stretch. I don't know if anyone wants to do a stretch or if there's a stretch scheduled, but yeah.
I think that's a great idea. Okay, so let's take a short break. Does 5 minutes sounds good?
Yeah, it sounds really good to me. And
okay.
If anyone wants to stretch with me, I can do it with you.
I'll do it with you.
I'll leave my camera on then.
Let's, for people who want to do a group stretch, let's stay to do a group stretch together. And if not, feel free to get some water or do something else and come back at 12:20.
I'm always trying to be really careful with my neck. I don't know if this happens to anyone else, but I spend a lot of time on the computer and the neck is like really good to stretch, but then also it's really easy to damage it somehow when you're stretching, especially if there's tension there. So I try and be so gentle. Yeah. Does anyone else know any stretches that they want to lead? Got our arms. And legs, maybe. Please. You can kind of turn it into a dance if you want. I'm going to do some floor stretches now.
Okay, so I'm back. I thought some of these description from the document interested me because there was so much optimism attached to social network and with chat rooms and online communication at the time, that people were speaking in a pretty sort of like honest way. Like there wasn't a lot of self-censorship in terms of out of fear of being criticized. And so like looking at how like the co-creator of Habitat addressed the community and how he like thought like what designing the community differently can do to like shape or reshape the community. I thought that was quite interesting. Yeah, but I wonder if anyone want to share your opinion on what you read.
Well, it was such a strong choice to reproduce so much about the hierarchies and economies of the US within this utopian world where it could be anything and you're carrying your head around like there's all these very fantastical elements, but they're just like, we gotta have like a social hierarchy where Greek gods are at the top or geek gods, and we have to have like the ability to steal and kill people.
So I see that someone has read the section about creating a shrift. So there was there were essentially murder and killing and just like slashing someone's pixels, like that was happening on Habitat, and so like the idea of moderation, which happens with like any kind of online social media, like had to like evolve and take place, and it was really like not surprising but depressing that the immediate solution of that is to replicate the real world in some way, right? So to like have like create a police position in the chat room and to give that person an authority to be able to moderate and kick people off, or like operate in certain ways that replicates the real world. I also thought that it was interesting that later on they changed the design of the space so that you could only commit to murder in rural spaces or rural areas. You couldn't do it in cities, but you can do it in nature or like in like rural parts of the country or the world. So there's a lot of like decision that's being made there that felt like a very so I feel like a very condensed version of like the biases that exist in the real world. There's a lot of really amazing comments here. I would recommend you all to read them now or later. I think one of the questions that I find very interesting in grappling with is how we could start like moving beyond our understanding of online moderation. So like usually, like the way the moderation that we often see is, like essentially blocking someone or flagging someone, take them off the platform, or creating certain keywords so that you wouldn't see those keywords on Twitter or whatnot, or not be able to see certain kinds of content. And I think a lot of those are really useful for this context. But recently, in relation to like reading like the shrift election, I'm also thinking about whether moderation can become get thought about or recontextualized within the understanding and dialogues of restorative justice. Like what would that look like, and what does that mean in an online context, and also like what are the limitations, right? Like when is it just not gonna work and we have to go through the process of like blocking someone, kicking someone off. I think the satisfaction I have with that specifically is like specifically relating to being online. It's so easy to come back. It's so easy to revive yourself and create a new account. That part of it hasn't really changed, right? It's become harder. You have to create new emails or something, but it's not. It's still very easy to revive yourself, and oftentimes not further dialogue has been made when it comes to conflicts. I love that someone referenced Habotown. Okay, so I'm gonna keep moving. We have like half an hour left. So a few like interface feature decisions that I wanted to point out is the AOL Instant Messenger. At the time, there was a option to edit away message. So if you, the expectation essentially is that you will be on AOL all the time. Like you'll be on it like 24/7. So like you'll be on it so much that you need to craft an away message to like let people know when you're gonna be back, or like where you've gone essentially. And so there's a lot of craft and like thinking and cleverness that goes behind editing the away message, and they're so crafted that like it's just like oftentimes look like people have like really overthought like what their away message was going to be. There was also another feature that was like just like a slightly different kinds of moderation that happened back in the days, which is the warning button. So like on AOL you can, or AIM, you can warn someone if they said something, undesirable to you, or insulting or offensive, crossing boundaries. You can click on a warning button, and they have like a warning level that can get increased if people warn them. And also their warning level is public. So if I'm warned by someone, everybody can see my warning level. So I was really interested in like researching on what kind of effect different kinds of like moderation decision or design has, right? So sometimes even if you think that you're installing a kind of like warning system or moderation system, like it doesn't mean that is actually how people are going to react to it. So for instance, I think warning button was really made for like warning strangers, like undesirable messages from strangers who like hop in and talk to you. But essentially, from what I've learned, like warning button was rarely used on strangers. It was mostly like something that like friends would do to each other. And also it was extremely easy to create a new account in AIM. so you would essentially like have like multiple accounts. Some of them would have like more warning level. And when you have more warning level, you would not be able to speak as frequently, but then you can just like hop onto like another account and kind of like talk to the same person over again. So there's not like a accumulation of like social credits that we see more in like the current form of social media. Like you're not like attached to like, a profile or like a history of images or stories. So it's easy to abandon an account and create new ones. And this was a really interesting early like social media performance by this group called the Desktop Theater. So essentially they were using the Palace, the first like graphical chat room interface, and they would like host play on it. This was a play on Waiting for Godot, and people would like walk in and hang out, and it would just be this kind of like, yes. Ooh, yeah, I love that idea. I love plays. I'm a sucker for plays. Yeah, okay, so maybe, Cleo, maybe you can help us later. Maybe we can like create a Google Doc or some way of staying in touch afterward. And if people want to join, we can figure that out as the next step.
Yeah, no problem. We can maybe use this doc as a starting point.
Yeah, good point.
Okay. And I will share the chat with everyone. I think this chat on Zoom is so good. And
I know, I can't, sorry, I'm not able to catch up to that yet.
I will send it to
at the end. But feel free, Cleo, feel free to interrupt me if anything is like you want to highlight. Okay. The last thing I want to mention, not because I thought, you know, like just because of like one thing that I thought I did really well, is this project that happened for 72 hours on Reddit called The Place. So essentially, what happened during that 72 hours was that all Reddit users were invited to contribute 1 pixel onto the canvas every few minutes. And they can only pick 1 out of 16 colors. So what happened from that was that groups of people were organizing among each other, talking on different boards or different Discord channels, and trying to figure out what kind of images they want to create together. Because if you're one person, you can only drop 1 pixel every few minutes. It would take forever to make any kind of picture. So there was like all these like organizing relating to what kind of image they want to put, but also like all these different forms of like invasion and like defense that happen with different images. So some people were creating images that cover other people. Some people were like growing this like blue corner that were trying to take over the world, and you know, all kinds of like a lot of details, a lot of documentation are available online relating to like what happened during the process of the 72 hours. But I thought it was kind of an interesting way to ease into thinking about prototyping, because sometimes just a very small decision, you know, that you make relating to how you moderate, you know, who can see who's being warned, even that very small tiny differences and decision that's being made by person designing the interface can really change the social dynamic, in my opinion. And here are some of my words for Web 2.0. You know, I don't have time to get into the full Web 2.0 story. I'm assuming that it's information that's easier to find, and also a lot of us might be more familiar with it. But I would say, in my experience, like a lot of, I like what John said about formality. So that's another thing I would add on to here. But Web 2.0 is characterized by like the corporateness of it. You know, essentially the centralized network reality became almost unavoidable seeming. And also the surveillance that came along with that, the idea that, you know, you're using our software for free, therefore, you know, we deserve this, we deserve your data, right? And also how energy consuming and demanding this version of the web feels, right? It's not like a chat room that I can occasionally thinking about logging in. Instead, it's something that follows you and becomes a part of you. I also think that, like, as a contrast to Web 1.0, the identity in Web 2.0 become very flattened, you know, and there's pros and cons to it too, I think. On one hand, there is way more authentication, and there's, you know, like way more sort of like the making sure of someone is really who they say they are. But then there's also, you know, what comes along with that, a kind of like flattened image and a less than fictional way to describe oneself. So identity become very flattened, in my opinion. I don't really know people in this era, using this era of social media, creating radically different avatars or radically different identities. I think there's subtle different identities, like, you know, my playful account versus my work account, but that feels like the degree that it gets. And I also think it's become really mundane, like in the sense of like, if you compare like what we're seeing right now, this video grid of ourselves, like essentially like, you know, the resolution and the quality of the video and the streaming really replicating, like trying to replicate real life versus like that, you know, where like you have to really do the mental stretch to imagine yourself as one of this avatar and being in that space. So that mundaneness, I think something is lost, like through like becoming closer to reality or visual reality as we know it. So the fourth wall has essentially come down completely, and we don't. I think this version of the internet don't really want us to think about the black box and think about the walls that's between us. So if anyone want to add anything to this, please feel free, but I kind of want to like jump into the next phase. So let's look at slide 27. This is a copy of slide 25 with the exception of the title, which is Future Web. So I would love to invite you now to enter either keywords or characteristics of the chat room / micro social media that you would like to see, and how you would like it to function. So for instance, a very easy one for me is like switching surveillance to encryption or secure, right? But I think there's a lot of possibilities that's not being worded by big tech companies yet that we can brainstorm on these 2 pages. So we'll come up with a list of keywords, and I'm going to delete all the ones here. And we're going to form small groups in 2 minutes where you talk about what you've written and talk about the possible ideas you have, and we'll do a super rapid drawing exercise to co-create a possible chat room together. Did we just lose? I think we lost it somehow. Let me see if I can trace back. Okay, my browser is super slow now, so oof. Yeah, we're definitely being listened to. Okay, if it's not slowing down on your page like mine, please, I'm sorry that if your comment was lost, if you can retype that again, that would be great. Or type it in a text editor and we can just make sure you don't lose it. Okay, and I also just added a list of references for experimental social media or chat rooms that I've researched that you can, go read. Some of them have simulator, which is really fun to use. A lot of them are well supported, but some of them are completely abandoned. so just know that not all of them are active. Kind of the nature and beauty of experimental chat rooms. So let's actually, let me look at the time. Let's wrap up the writing in 2 minutes and I'll put everyone into a breakout room. Actually, Cleo, do you think, are you able to do it?
I just made you as a host, so you should be, but I can also do it if you want.
Okay, I see it now. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to explain the prompt. This is going to be a super fast drawing exercise. It's not meant to be perfect, obviously. It's meant to, brainstorm and get our ideas that may be conscious or unconscious out really fast with each other. So, so think about this drawing exercise as a way to start a dialogue with each other. I'm going to break you into rooms of 3 people. So if each of you could bring a paper and a pen and start sketching some of the ideas, start thinking about what kind of is this a chat room in the traditional sense or in a weird experimental sense, or is this something else? What kind of people do you imagine joining this space? What kind of features would the space have based on your disgruntledness of like the previous spaces, or another parallel way of like thinking about how to be more creative and more imaginative with a different kind of space. So figure out what your commonalities are and try to draw something and design a very simple chat room together. So I'm going to create a breakout room.
I think I'm gonna stay out, Xin, just to chat.
Oh, sorry, then you're included. Yeah, please. Feel free to join too if you want. But I'm gonna get a glass of water.
Sounds good.
Lian and Umi or Yumi, are you there? Okay, I'm gonna move someone into another room so they're not alone. That's so great to hear, Mohammed. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what happened?
I can go again. I was talking to Michelle, and correct me if I pronounce it wrong, and Ramona, and we shared that we like chat rooms where language could be deconstructed and used more as like a texture and affect thing, and there was less rules about how to use text, and also how chatting spatially made a huge difference, and having avatars and augmented aesthetics. We were also mentioning how Web 1.0 had more risks though, which is why like if we were to create a chat room, it would combine like deconstructed language, spatial chat, but also some form of safety and accountability. That's how far we got though.
That's really wonderful.
That's fine. Okay, so my partner and I, we actually discussed two ideas. One was around consent and community governance, because we believe, and especially my partner, that a lot of the time, the current chat rooms that we have, users' input is not validated. And what they actually want and how they like to actually those chat box or the social media to work with, that's not there. So their input and their feedback and their insight is not validated, and it's not visible. Number one. And number two, that was about the responsive design and cross-platform. So for example, if you're using a chat box or any chat room in one specific device, you are unable to use and enjoy the same type of functionality with other devices that you may have. So maybe something around that. So then it's fluid in terms of cross platforms and responsive design. So these were the two ideas that we had discussed. Thank you.
I was in a group with Fame, and similar to what Kay was saying, we were also thinking about different ways of working with text, and how normally when we look at text on screen, it's very Western, it's very left to right, it's very top to bottom. And we were thinking about a chat where that's not, things kind of swirl around the periphery. It's kind of quieter, more private. Those conversations are sort of on the outside, sort of like a dance floor where you kind of have a ring of people on the outside, and then kind of a couple people, a more dynamic social experience that is more unconventional and reproduces some of the stickiness of like actual conversation, some of the awkwardness, but we felt that awkwardness might be generative of kind of interesting experiences.
All these ideas sound so amazing. I'm just so amazed that it came out in such a short time. I mean, I'm sure you've all been thinking about this for a long time now, but it is time, so I don't want to drag on for too long. So what I think would be wonderful is if you're interested in continuing this conversation as a group together, maybe you can take a picture of your drawing or whatever idea you have and put it into the slideshow, and we can continue this conversation. I can ask Cleo to help facilitating some of the group email to get us connected.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, we'll talk about this after the workshop, but I want to thank everyone. Such an amazing group, so participatory and engaging. It was really nice to like start the festival with such a vibrant group. And Xin Xin, thank you so much. That was a wonderful workshop. Really excited and happy about this. So like I said, I will share the chat of the Zoom. If everyone feels comfortable with that, you can email me if you don't want me to, but I can share it with everyone probably by tomorrow. I don't know yet where the workshops recording are going to be. Definitely on YouTube, but maybe on the website platform. Like I shared the website Vector Festival. It's 2020.vectorfestival.org. We have 2 workshops coming up tomorrow, one on surveillance, the history of masks, and a tutorial on anti-surveillance masks with foraged plants and also with like social media filters. So join us. And then the one after is about fermentation as revolution, and we're gonna bake some bread and talk about revolution. So if you want to join us, email me. I can just send you the Zoom link, or you can register on Eventbrite if you want to make a donation. And yeah, thank you so much once again, and we'll see you later. Thanks.
Thank you so much. This was so wonderful.
Yeah, it was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Love you.